Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are taking a look at Series 2 of Line of Duty, the well-awarded British crime procedural drama that has become a phenomenon in the UK for the past few years. And with me to discuss it is Dara Sanders. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe. We're looking to grow our audience, so if you can, please hit that subscribe button, share this video with everybody that you know. We're always pumping out new content, and we are going to be planning more shows in the future. But without further ado, let's dive in. Dara, how are you doing today on this fine Sunday afternoon?
I'm doing well. It's so interesting you mentioned Line of Duty because it is such a fascinating look at flawed characters. And it's not just the police officers, it's all around. It's the guys that investigate them.
I was gonna say, because when we looked at Series 1, it just left me a little bit perplexed because everything was so disjointed. You had the main trio of AC-12, which is the anti-corruption unit, basically investigating corruption charges in the police force. So basically, the guys policing the police. And I told you
affairs essentially,
and I told you at that time I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, and you said, well, you basically have to be patient. You got to let this play out. It's not just a one and done thing, which brings us to Series 2. Now, initial thoughts were Series 2 was a lot more intriguing, right? There was a lot more going on, but at the same time, it was one of those things where a lot of the antipathy that I felt in the first series kind of remained. It's just it got transferred from one person to another.
Right. And I would also say it was interesting when I was watching it, I was thinking back to the cop in the first series that they looked at, right?
Oh, Gates.
His his crime or whatever was like these trumped up arrests, right? Like that's the thing that they were initially looking at him for. Whereas in the second series, what we have is this woman taking the call. So we're off to the races now, where she's in the situation initially. We don't know anything else about her, right? Like really nothing else about her in terms of what kind of police officer she is. That comes kind of later.
Well, it kind of no, I have to counter that because from the first few minutes, you kind of get the sense this is someone who takes her job very seriously and someone who's very dedicated.
I didn't get that impression until she was interviewed. I didn't get that impression personally until she was interviewed and she knew all the codes and she was able to the statutes and she was able to push back at them. And she was completely defiant. So and you see the complete scene of what happens, and immediately you're like, oh my God, this is interesting. Basically just to talk about what happened, there's an ambush where this person in witness protection needs to be moved because there's a fear for his safety.
Right.
And she has this witness protection officer enlists the help of Lindsey Denton, DI. I think she's a DI, Lindsey Denton, and then she takes a couple of officers from her unit to help as backup.
Now keep in mind she was trying to get in touch with the chief constable to get his authority, but unable to reach him. She was like, fuck it. She's like, fuck it, I'm just doing it. And of course the main thing that is kind of held over her is no guns, right? No guns are used. So the police officers are not armed, right? The backup police officers do not have arms, which is weird, right? And that's like a point of contention. That kind of is a thread along the episode. That part really confused me because you would think, instinctually like that, you would want to go in, guns blazing, just because if you got someone who's in witness protection, who's got to be moved, you would think whoever's going after this person,
they're in danger.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to attack them with pool noodles. I mean, they're going to be armed to the teeth. So you would think Lindsey Denton would have the sense to know what's going on. But to be fair, I'm thinking in her case, the reason why she why she did this. Obviously, it was an error in judgment, but because she was very much determined to try to make sure she helps Akers out in moving this person in witness protection.
Right.
It's just, it's just, in law enforcement and the military, a slight error can cost lives, which unfortunately happens.
Essentially is what happened. Right.
Right.
So they're ambushed and then they're shot at and set on fire, which was, and you're thinking, okay, she's not that far from this scene and they're not focused at all on her.
And by the way, can I just add, like, I mean, I'm not trying to make light of car accidents, but she didn't really suffer that much when her car hit the
she
tree.
Didn't. No, she didn't. She just kind of hit a pole.
Yeah.
She wasn't really going at a fast rate of speed, I don't think.
It's a crawl. She crawled towards the tree.
Yeah, when she hits the pole, it's just like, okay, because she immediately gets out the car and starts trying to see, can I save someone, right? Like that's her first thing. And then, at this point, I think the perpetrators are now gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so now she's like in like rescue mode, right? So she calls it in and then she's trying to save whoever she can save.
Right.
And that's kind of all we know at that point. Right.
Well, Akers is pretty much baking at that point, and the witness.
She's baking, yeah.
Yeah, and then the witness, he's in critical condition, but but afterwards we get reintroduced to our lovely trio.
Our favorite trio.
Yeah, Hastings, Arnott, and Fleming.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, like, the issue that I had with Arnott in the first series, I couldn't really find any issues this time around. Like, he seemed more subdued. He seemed more subdued.
So he was more subdued. It was Fleming was the one that had all the drama.
See, but that's the thing. My issue wasn't with Fleming; it was with Hastings.
Okay, well, okay. Did you think Hastings was heavy-handed?
I thought he was. I also thought he was a bit robotic because the entire time he was just thinking about one thing, and it was just him trying to get back with his ex-wife. And the entire time I'm just thinking, I'm like, dude, get your head in the game. Like, your wife doesn't. Hopefully, your wife shouldn't influence how you behave, as a police officer.
But it was appearances for him, right? Like, because I think he was, and I don't even know. Like, to me, it seemed like maybe he was angling for a promotion, or he got word potentially he could get a promotion.
He was pushing. He was pushing for a promotion. Yeah.
So, like, what essentially happens as we kind of go through episode 1, 2, 3, I think, is Fleming has a affair with Akers' husband.
Right.
So now she says she's too involved. She went through academy with Akers. She's too involved. She says, take me off the case. They introduce a new partner
who only lasts for like an episode and a half, by the way.
Right. Yeah, that was rough. Yeah. Who has a slight drinking problem, apparently. So we're introduced to her. I can't think of her name, but we're introduced to her, and then she now partners with Arnold to investigate this case.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, the reason why I found this season so confounding was I had so much sympathy for D.I. Lindsey Denton almost throughout.
See, so
and go ahead.
So, by the way, her name is Trotman.
Trotman, okay,
young lady. Here is the biggest issue I have with series 2.
Okay,
it's heavy-handed, right?
It is.
They are going. I mean, Jed Mercurio, for whatever reason, just wants to hammer home the point that Lindsey Denton is the victim. Now, I'll say that. So I'm going to go on a very long tangent, but bear with me here.
No, and I think I get what you're saying. Go ahead.
So first of all, I mean, the first 30 minutes of episode 1, Lindsey Denton witnesses, a colleague and the person she's trying to help, get burned to death, and then the 2 officers she was responsible for getting gunned down, right?
Right, in her unit. These are people in her unit that are now dead.
And she and she was in charge of all of that. Right, so right off the bat, you would think, okay, I could sort of feel for her because she's in a shit position. Like it's Kobayashi Maru basically.
Yeah, it's really rough for her, right?
Now
and she has the whatever.
Yeah, the neck brace. Now you would think, okay, so yeah, I can sort of feel for her. What happens next is when she goes to the bathroom, they basically the entire department gives her a swirly, and I'm just thinking, okay, this is like. Is Jen McCurry obsessed with toilet humor? Because we saw the shit in Arnett's car in series 1. Now they got to give her a swirly. Okay, fine, whatever.
That was too much.
I mean, I thought it was too much, but then they take it a bit further.
Right.
So later on, Lindsey Denton gets arrested, and she spends time in prison, and then she gets physically threatened to the point where she can no longer feed herself. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, okay, you really, really want me to feel sorry for this character to the point that you are physically breaking her limbs to the point where I have to sit there and think, okay, so I'm just speculating here. You want me to feel sorry for Lindsey Denton, right? But wait. Her mother is in hospice care. And then while she's in prison, she comes to find out that her mother is dead.
Well, she has a massive stroke.
She has a massive stroke, and then while she's at the hospice center, she passes away, and then she gets upset. So now I'm like, okay, you really, 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 really want me to feel sorry for this character.
3 incidents.
There's no subtlety about this.
No, there's 3 incidents. They put shit in their food, right? That's number 1. That's the first thing that happens.
They give her the swirly.
She's attacked in the gym.
Yeah.
Right? And there was no CCTV, so they don't have a record of what happened.
Right.
And then she goes to see there were 2 officers who essentially threatened her. They say, do you want some tea? And then they throw the boiling water on her hands.
Right. Oh, I also forgot to mention her transport gets attacked and she gets kidnapped by 2 cops.
Well, I mean, that's later, but that's where it really kind of takes off into a direction that.
But that part's like the icing on the cake.
Yeah, that's the icing on the cake. That's where kind of you start to really question, like, what's this wider, broader conspiracy? And is it related to what happened to Gates from the first series 1?
Right.
Yeah. But so I think I agree. Go ahead. I agree.
But what I was going to say is that I've always understood the British to be very good at subtlety, right? I mean, way back in the day, we could watch something like we could watch something like Inspector Morse or Sherlock Holmes or whatever.
Inspector Morse is the best.
And we get the subtleties. We can sort of pick up on things. Jed Mercurio is very much going to just let you know, hey, this woman's being treated like shit. You should feel sorry for her. And I'm like, do I?
I'll be honest, and I'll say this. I hate to say, Star Jones as a lawyer, but I felt that they really didn't have enough to hold her. I felt like the evidence was not enough. And when I first saw it, I think I felt like that. Watching it a second time, I still felt like that.
That's what confused me because the thing is like if someone was deemed incompetent at their job, I could sort of see internal affairs kind of getting this done in like 24 hours. But there had to be something about it, and that's what I was thinking the entire time was, there's like it goes to the top where someone is basically just saying, let's just screw with this woman and let's just do to her what God did to Job.
I mean, basically. it was so extreme because there's one way, like in any situation, sometimes in any situation, there's one way to look at it. Then there's the inverse, like what could have happened. And, there's 2 ways to look at it. And
but the thing is, like in series, I get your point. I agree with it wholeheartedly. But the problem is that the way that series 2 was executed, it doesn't give you that option. It's pretty much this is what it is. You got to accept it. And if you don't, then you can piss off.
Well, what I would say is, I think the point of doing it that way was to have the payoff you have in the last 15 minutes of the last episode.
Yeah.
Because I think this is building up sympathy. All these things happening to her. And there's Arnold, who's like, you think, like, completely on her side. Like, why are you all picking on this woman? She's completely innocent. What are you doing? And we learn that he's trying to get in on her side. So
he's basically doing what Fleming couldn't do.
Exactly. And the other part, I think, let's table Arnold for a bit. Fleming is interesting in this episode because she's having this affair with Acre's husband, which apparently has been ongoing. She learns that Acres actually had contacted her, what we think was about this case. She wanted to talk about this case and she missed the call. She was scared to use her own phone, so she called on her husband's line and she missed the call. Yeah. She's been kicked out of her home. She's undercover in Lindsey Denton's precinct. Lindsey Denton does not trust her, and she figures her out.
Yeah.
And her whole world is like, and then Lindsey Denton essentially threatens her. She says she puts the phone down when she's interviewed because she has evidence on all of them, right? She knows that Arnold has been seeing this nurse that is a witness to the witness being killed. And then we have a Hastings who has financial troubles, right? Which obviously led to his wife leaving him. And then she subtly threatens Fleming with, like, I know about your phone contact information.
Yeah.
So Fleming is on a completely personal, emotional mission to get Lindsey Denton. So she's not even thinking, I think, clearly. She completely wants to get her. She's not, because Lindsey Denton is smarter than her. Like, that's how I see it. Yeah. And she realizes it. And then, so she's like, he changed the, right? Her husband changed the lock. She has a son with him. She can't see her son. She's sleeping in her car.
Yeah.
Like, all this stuff going on with her. And then Lindsey Denton is there, and she's a cunning woman. And I mean, she's good. And so, like, that whole thing is vexing Fleming in this episode, which I think is fascinating to watch. Because
right. Well, I was gonna say, because it kind of sounds like it's almost like there's almost like a cat fight element too. It's like, which woman's gonna come out on top. And and to me, that part of the episode, not episode, but series 2, was about Fleming. Like, there's something there, like her pounding that over and over. There's something there. I don't trust her. She's too cunning, like, all manipulative, all that stuff. Right? Well, what's funny, I'll tell you what's funny is that because in series 1, I basically harped on the fact that Arnold was a bit too heavy-handed, a bit too, he was an open book. And here it's like everybody just flipped the script. It's like now it's Fleming who's doing what Arnold's doing.
Oh,
and Arnold's being more subtle.
No, Arnold was completely subtle in what he was doing. He went to the mother's funeral with her. He drove her to get her mother's effects, like, that she asked for. He's sitting next to her in these follow-up interviews where he's looking at his colleagues like, what are you doing? Right? Yeah. So you're like, wow, this is crazy, right? So
it's like, where's this guy? Like, where's this guy been all series 1?
Right? Yeah, because he's like, when I go back to, like, actors who play the swarmy world very well. Matt Damon comes to mind. This guy is really good at that. And so you have that, and then you have Hastings trying to put out this image of him as still being with his wife, even though he's living essentially in a hostel, right? He's living in a hostel. he lost money because he put money in some kind of scheme with someone else that I think that we're told. So, but he still talks to his wife, but I don't think they're officially divorced. But
they're kind of separated.
A sensitive subject for him.
I mean, here's my thing. I'm one of those people who believes that, you know, if you're going to tell a fast-paced story like this, you would mainly want to focus on story A, right? I mean, I might sound a bit harsh, but I personally don't really care what's going on with Hastings' life, right? The Fleming storyline, I can sort of understand what's going on there because it's intertwined with what's going on with
it's
the case
totally intertwined as it comes out, right?
Right, but the Hastings storyline it makes no sense because it adds nothing to the story other than the fact that this guy is maybe trying to push this case to get resolved because he wants to get in, with the top brass and get that promotion he's been looking for.
The only way I can think of how it affects Hastings is that, what's the guy's name? The DC that was
Dryden.
Dryden is a DCC.
Yeah.
Detective Chief Constable, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
So he has the power potentially, right, to recommend Hastings for a promotion. He
even hints at that too.
He hints at that to Hastings. Hastings is hesitant to investigate Dryden, right? Mm-hmm. Because Dryden had an affair with Lindsey Denton. She had an abortion, we know, and then there were blackmail photos.
Yeah, with that 15-year-old girl, Carly.
Right, Carly Kirk.
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the part of it where, and that's kind of to me where the series takes a turn into this organized crime element. I think this happens around episode 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So now we're introduced to these additional characters.
Yeah, we get Cotton back.
Yeah, so we get, and then we get Cotton back, and there's a reveal with him at the end, but we get Cotton back, and then we start to hear, okay, so we have this Asian guy, well, they call him Asian, South Asian guy that Carly Kirk was seeing, because Lindsey Denton has now been
you're talking about Prasad, right?
Yeah, Prasad. So Lindsey Denton has now been reassigned to a new division where she's in charge of missing persons, right? She's looking through all these different missing persons. And the interesting part is we see Jackie Laverty, right, from series 1.
Yep.
She looks at Carly Kirk and she says, I think I want to look into that. We don't know why, but that's the case she wants to look at.
Right.
And so that's the case where it leads to this trail of Prashard, right? A cop that apparently she was familiar with. And so that's where kind of this unfolding happens, this kind of unraveling happens with Prashard and Jeremy Cole, who is allegedly the caddy, who's the inside police officer who has ties to organized crime.
Right.
Lindsey Denton is being transported to her mom's. They're coming back. They kidnap her. Jeremy Cole dies, and Prashard does a dying declaration, and that's when kind of the shit hits the fan.
Well, let's also keep in mind too, because we mentioned Trotman earlier. I mean, let's not forget Cole. We come to find out Cole was the guy who was responsible for offing, the
witness,
the witness, and then Tommy Hunter from
Tommy Hunter.
And I've got something to say about Tommy Hunter later on, but he's also the one who's responsible for throwing Trotman out the window.
Yes.
And turning her into basically pavement sandwich.
Yes. And so, there is all this now opening up that's kind of outside of this case we have. I mean, it's part of the case, but, that's when kind of all this evidence starts to kind of spiral out, where Tommy Hunter has recorded videos, right? Because what's her name? The witness protection officer,
Akers
has these files, and some of these files include videos of Tommy Hunter talking about, "Will you promise me immunity?" and you didn't do it. And there's a suggestion that he's talking about Dryden.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, that's where it gets kind of muddled in kind of this side thing about what police officers are connected to organized crime, essentially these bent coppers.
Now, here's my question. So at the end of series 1, we see Tommy Hunter arrested, right? And presumably he was going to be taken away, but then obviously he ends up in witness protection.
Right.
Do we? And I might have missed this, but do we know what kind of information he was giving, or what he was going to do to help the police? Was he going to expose who was on the take, or
right?
What?
So my understanding is Tommy Hunter was privy to the officers who were on the take,
okay,
as well as the organized crime figures who were kind of leading this cabal, so to speak.
And he was going to name names. So he knew he knew who was in and
right. And so he obviously, what he wanted was, the main thing, he wanted immunity, right? So he wanted immunity from prosecution. But then there's this whole wrinkle that kind of happens where, I don't know if we should get to it yet, but like that's where the interesting part, I think, is where Pritchard is in the hospital. They're waiting for him to talk. He says, "I want immunity. I'm not saying anything until you give me immunity."
Right.
So then he starts implicating Dryden. And Dryden, who had an affair with Lindsey Denton, is kind of really defensive. So much so that you're thinking, is he telling the truth, right? Like, it was interesting when he was interviewed, because Hastings was very reluctant to allow them to arrest Dryden. I
mean, but to Hastings' credit, I mean, he did understand, like, there had to be objectivity in executing, the law. So as much as I was annoyed by his storyline this series, I will give him props for, staying true to what it means as a cop. And I even remember, like, there was that one scene where he tells his wife, he had to do the right thing, and she just flips out on him. I'm like, okay, I'm like, okay, dude, your wife's a bitch. Like,
right. Well, that's a separate thing.
Yeah.
But they're presenting this evidence to him. So we have Dryden, who's the detective chief constable. He's very high up. We know that. He's the one that's doing all these press conferences. Pritchard has these pictures of him that are very incriminating, that seem to be blackmail material. So there's this idea that Dryden is the one that is reluctant to give immunity to Tommy Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's very defensive as they're presenting him with evidence. You had an affair with Lindsey Denton. He's basically kind of like, she's crazy, she was stalking me, all this stuff. And he's pushing back. So
and I think the implication too is that it's Dryden who's kind of pulling the strings behind all of the, I guess, attacks on Lindsey Denton.
Exactly. Right. And so, like, he's the one responsible for her going out, like all this stuff. Right. And he is, he left with Carly Kirk at that event on August 16th, where they had Lindsey Denton essentially tailing him. And, pictures of him potentially getting a sexual act performed on him, but he says he doesn't know anymore. And then there's this side thing about him covering up for his wife so he could have an alibi. So it gets very convoluted, right?
Yeah. It was the I think it was the traffic incident.
It's extremely convoluted. And I found myself in his interview, as he's responding to questions, thinking that, he sounds kind of credible here. And it kind of bears fruit because there was not sufficient evidence to charge him for the ambush. The only thing they can charge him for was perverting the cause of justice for the the speeding offense. So that's where we're like, okay, so we have Pritchard, Jeremy Cole is potentially the caddy. Matthew Cotton, I think he's a detective inspector, meets with one of his old friends from the Gate Squad. Yeah. And he's like, you think we can put this on Jeremy Cole? And he's like, his friend is like, yeah, I think we can. Essentially.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind too, Cotton is kind of making, not too subtle threats about his pension.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, but here's my thing though, because throughout, because throughout series 2, there's like all these twists and turns.
There's so many.
But the focus obviously is around Lindsey Denton and the fact that she messed up, in this ambush case. The part that kind of threw me off, it wasn't really the Dryden case, because by the time you get to episode 5 and episode 6, where the implication was that she and Denton had an affair, you could sort of understand where the misdirection might have come from.
Right.
The Carly Kirk storyline kind of confused me a bit, because this entire time, like, Lindsey Denton, when she's assigned to missing persons, she kind of develops this sort of fondness for Carly, but at the same time, it's like, well, where's the payoff here? And
right.
really the only payoff that you get is her just sitting on the coast somewhere waiting to get on a ship.
And that's the part that's really interesting, because as we, we'll talk about soon, there's this payoff at the end, but there's this interesting part where, so she's assigned this, thankless job as the head of this missing persons unit. So she has to decide what case is she going to follow up. She's going through these pictures. She sees the picture of Carly Kirk. For whatever reason, we don't know, right? Why? She says, I'm going to follow up with this girl. And we think, as the audience, she doesn't know who she is.
Right.
And so, like, that's, to me, the interesting part. And there's this intersection, because, throughout the episode, they're doing these follow-up interviews with Lindsey Denton where they think they're gathering more and more evidence. And one of the things that kind of connects is Jeremy Cole was somehow, some way, and Pritchard were at this mechanic shop where Carly Kirk's boyfriend was found, or that her best friend said he might have worked at, or there's some connection there. And so that looks suspicious. So there are these like little things that they're trying to do, like they're trying to gather this evidence that's still kind of circumstantial, that you're like, maybe, okay, I guess this adds to the case against Lindsey Denton, but it's like something's not adding up.
Right. And that's what really threw me off right there, because all the other storylines I could sort of follow and figure they can sort of connect with that, because Dryden getting in trouble for the traffic offense.
Right.
It's small fry, but at the same time, it's something you would expect if he was in a situation like that. Right.
Right.
The Carly Kirk thing. I mean, had they just concluded, yes, she was murdered by by Prasad and Cole at Dryden's command, then that would have been a pretty good payoff. But obviously, the implication is, it turns out the body that you think is Carly Kirk isn't actually Carly Kirk. And I'm like, you almost had it. Right. Like, you could have just left it like that. Man.
Right. And so it's like, you're just like, oh boy, here we go. So now essentially we're kind of getting into episode 5 and 6.
Yeah.
As the audience, we're thinking, well, what do you have against Lindsey Denton? What's the big deal with this woman? What does she really do?
What is it about this woman that apparently everybody in Britain just wants to beat the shit out of her?
Right. Everybody hates
she's a punching bag, literally.
She totally is. And the way, I have to say, the way they play her is so fascinating, because you know, at the end, which we'll talk about, she was at this shindig, right, on August 16th, where Dryden was at, and she's full makeup.
Right.
But throughout the series, Luca, she is so dour and dressed down and so sympathetic. She wears no makeup. Like it's nothing about her is cleaned up. She had to downsize the house she was living in. She has a neighbor that plays loud music. It's all this. Everything is leading up to, like, why are you persecuting this woman?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, we're just like getting all this information, and we're like, are we missing something? What are we missing here? And we don't get the payoff until the last 15 minutes of the last episode.
Right.
Because there's this belief that Dryden, who was in the car with Carly Clark, was dropping her off at the train station. And Lindsey Denton said, I was following them, but I just left. That's what we're made to believe. That's what she tells the police.
Right.
And then as Fleming is interviewing her, we get her having flashbacks to what actually happened. And, you know, what were your thoughts about how it all went down?
I will say this, like, you know, at least with the main storyline, like when you see the flashback, it's a much better payoff than what you see in series one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because at least that way you begin to see, you know, because obviously, you know, throughout the 6 episode run, you know, they're showing Lindsey Denton not as this like dour, sympathetic punching bag, but as someone who's very cold and very calculating.
Yeah.
So when you see the flashback, that she's actually the one who's pretty much got everybody by the balls and is pretty much, you know, I wouldn't say running the operation, but nearly close to, you know, being at the very top. You begin to see that there's more to this woman than meets the eye.
Right.
What's kind of interesting too is the fact when when Arnett and Fleming check out the car, they discovered the tracking device, right? And
that was the first indication.
Right.
Okay, this is off. Something's off.
Right. And then you come to find out originally it wasn't meant for Akers. It was meant for Denton.
Exactly.
But Denton just decided, oh, well, how can I throw the scent off? I know, I'll just stick it on Akers' car, and
right.
You know, nobody will be none the wiser. The other thing that kind of made me scratch my head and wonder, maybe Lindsey Denton isn't as wholesome as she seems. Remember when they did the interview with that with that cop? I think it was episode 5.
O'Neill.
Yeah, and he was very much confused as to why they're asking about why was he looking up Tommy Hunter's address.
Right. He was completely. When I say I'm, you know, when actors, you know, obviously I do think Britain has better actors, but the face on him, the dumbfoundedness. So
it's perfect. It's perfect.
He was just like, what the hell are you talking about?
Yep.
Right.
I mean, a lot of politicians could learn how to pull a face like that.
Right.
But like as soon as he did that interrogation and they asked him that question, I was like, that's got to be Denton. Like,
yeah, I mean,
that's the only woman who would have the wherewithal right. to do that.
Exactly. And so yeah, but it was so fascinating to me how it did go down, because, you know, it's still in some ways an empathetic storyline, right? She's seeing Carly Kirk being beaten, right, by Tommy Hunter. So she's like, who is this guy? She's essentially stalking, right, still Dryden. And he sees Carly Denton, and then he kicks Carly Kirk out of the car. Carly Kirk goes to Tommy Hunter. He's like, oh my God, we're trying to do this blackmail against him. What are you doing? He beats her up. She does a runner, right? Mm-hmm. So now, you know, Lindsey Denton is on a mission, like, who is this fool that's doing this, and he tries to find out, and that's when she meets Akers. And that's the fascinating part, where Akers then comes to her home, but she has to essentially ensnare her. And she does that with money. And then we have the reveal of Matthew Cotton, who's in the car with her. So now we have this feeling that Matthew is bent. And so now she's involved, and in the way that she tries to kind of insulate herself is she'll take the money to her mom, wherever her mom is staying, the nursing home, where that's where she kept the money.
Right.
And so like that's the part, but then it's like now you're thinking as a viewer, okay, well, is that conspiracy to commit murder? Is that bribe? Like, what is that? Like, did she really?
Well, I think in this case, like Akers, I think Akers had no idea she was going to be offered up, right? She was thinking, I'll be able to walk away just like everybody else is. So,
and of course, yeah.
And I think Denton herself was probably like, oh, we're all just going to get our money. Obviously, we'll learn, you can trust us. We'll be quiet. Scouts on her. So it must have come as a shock to her when everybody kind of gets killed. And she's like, wait a second, this isn't part of the plan. Like,
right.
What am I not being told here?
Well, okay. But the other part is, so now you have Matthew Cotton, who's now like, a bent copper. So now we're looking back to what Pritchard said to AC-12, which is that Denton was not to be touched.
Right.
So now we're like, okay, were they going to pin it on her? Was that the idea?
I think that was the implication.
Yeah, I feel like it was.
Because because she really was. She was a nobody. She wasn't too valuable enough to, take out of the scene, but she wasn't really valuable enough to not have all this pinned on her, right? They could have gotten anybody else. So it's kind of like one of those things where, there really was no way out once she accepted the deal. I mean, she was accepting, this is it.
Well, they had to get her to accept the money to go along with the plan, right? Like that was something
but that's what I'm saying. Once she accepted it, like she was in, and
she was in.
Yeah, and she must have, with her accepting the money, it was also that, implicit understanding that whatever happens to you, you just got to deal with it.
Right. But did you feel like that then kind of tied everything up in a bow?
It did, but
okay.
but here's my thing. So series one, we come to find out Tommy Hunter is the guy who's been pulling the strings all along behind the Jackie Laverty incident, everything like that, right? It's kind of like what you see in Marvel, where we see a recurring villain that kind of set him up as the big baddie, right?
Right.
So my understanding is, okay, so Tommy Hunter is going to be set up as the main antagonist of the series. What really struck me was the fact that because initially I didn't know that was Tommy Hunter who gets attacked and charged to a crisp and then later killed in the hospital. What my expectation was that he would kind of survive at least up until series 3.
Oh,
maybe
interesting.
And part of series 4, because the way they build him up throughout series 1, they make him look like this is a guy that AC-12 is going to have to contend with. It's not going to be the best coppers.
Someone.
He's the mastermind behind all this,
right?
Exactly. So when he gets killed, I'm like, okay, so who exactly are we supposed to go after? Because we know there is a huge conspiracy, like that's a given,
right? So we know coppers, and this is the thing with the series that is kind of frustrating, where you almost have to think in terms of like, let's look at the whole series in context.
Right.
Because but I do like to break it down series by series, because I think, the profile of all these cops are really interesting because their experiences are very empathetic, I think. So like that to me is compelling. But at the same time, you're kind of looking at it as, okay, we see this, they killed Jackie and they're threatening Gates. And then in the second series, we see that they're blackmailing the detective chief constable.
Right. And then Dan's being put through the ringer.
Sure. Right. So Prasad and Jeremy Cole, they're small fish.
Right.
So it's like, how big are we talking here? Like, that's kind of the part where there's not a, you're trying to wrap your head around this. Like, how high are we going?
And that's my thing, because with Tommy Hunter, you have the sort of quantifiable element where like the buck stops with him, but by taking him out, you begin to wonder. So really, Cotton wasn't reported. There's my implication, because my understanding was at the last episode of series 1, Cotton was reporting to Tommy Hunter, right?
Right.
But if Cotton, is orchestrating this entire scheme, this entire ambush that results in Hunter getting killed at the end, then, because I don't think Cotton is doing this all on his own.
So we think of him as acting on orders.
Right. So whose orders is he acting under?
Exactly.
That's my thing.
So is this a organized crime unit that is kind of mob-like, and then they have multiple police officers on the payroll? So Cotton is the conduit to help them, kind of manipulate things within the police force.
Right.
That's kind of, after series 2, that's kind of where I'm at, right? Like, that's where I'm thinking. Cotton is trying to pin everything on Jeremy Cole as being the caddy. The implication by the end of the series 2 is Cotton appears to be potentially the caddy. We don't know, but it potentially he could be the one that's the conduit, right? But it's still it's still mired in this secrecy that is not clear. And so then you have AC-12 and then Hastings. And it's so weird, because it's like, and actually, when I watched this series 2, I was trying to think to myself, how high up does this go when it comes to the police force? Because one of the things that I think either Cotton or Fleming or Arnold said is, once you get high up in the police force, it's more about politics than policing.
Right.
Which is, I think, very important, because it is all politics. All you're doing is you're the pretty face in front of the news cameras, right? You're not actually doing the grunt work.
Right. You're not in the trenches.
Exactly. Yeah. You're delegating all of that. And your whole focus is how you look in front of the cameras and how the press sees you. And that's why Dryden was so concerned with the press, and if they knew about this speeding situation that happened with his wife and all that stuff. He was completely consumed by it because he was worried about saving face.
Right.
And so, that's kind of the part of it that I find fascinating, that everybody's kind of looking to get up to that point. And I felt a real hesitation from Hastings to investigate Dryden up until the point where he had no excuse not to. And
I will say this, though. The investigation of Dryden, while it seemed like a good at the time, it feels like the payoff was very minimal, right?
It was very minimal, and he, to me, was very, like I said, he was very defensive, but he also offered up a lot of counter arguments for, you're completely on the wrong path. This is not, you don't know what you're doing.
And it turns out he was right.
Yeah, he was completely right. And it was interesting because, to me, and I don't know how you felt, Luca, about this. If I'm how do I say this? If I'm like a target of blackmail, for example.
Right.
Someone like Prasad, who would allegedly work under me, would he necessarily have all these files to be used against me? Right? Like, to me, it was kind of it was a redirect, right? Like, why does he have all these files implicating Dryden if he's working with Dryden, if he's working on the direction of Dryden? Like,
right. And it was something like that. Like, I felt like them trying to do that misdirect was, was a bit of a it was a bit of a misstep, because you kind of got the feeling after a little bit that Prasad really isn't working for Dryden. He's working for whoever the same guy Cotton is working for.
Completely someone else, because it's like all he had in terms of files were things that he had stuff that would implicate Dryden. Like,
I mean, but why else would he ask for immunity? Because if it was Tommy Hunter, and if Tommy Hunter was like was like the main guy, then he wouldn't have gone that point. We're like, oh yeah, I'll tell you whatever you want, because I mean, Tommy Hunter's dead, but
he'd be fine because Tommy's dead. But he was in fear of his life, right? Like,
right, and I don't think he was. I don't think he'd be too afraid of Cotton, because by consideration, I think Prasad is pretty fit enough to take down Cotton. I mean, look what he did to Cole. He just smacked him in the head and killed him right then and there. Right. So by asking for immunity, I mean, you have to wonder who or what is he afraid of that he would go so far as to say, I need to be in witness protection. I need to change my name. I need to have a whole new identity.
Right.
Because if I say something, I'm dead.
Right. And he's, and you have to kind of at that point kind of believe that he's serious about what he's saying. Right. Which is why probably it was granted. But then also, I think that what was interesting to me at that point, when they said, okay, Denton wasn't to be touched, and I think at that point that was when she got the bail application and then she was free.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, that was when I was like, okay, what do you have on her now? Like, that was when I was just kind of confused about the actual case against.
I think with that was supposed to be the misdirect right there.
Yeah,
that's what I think.
Totally. And I think that at that point you're thinking, well, she's exonerated, right? Like, that's where I went, and that's kind of what I was thinking. So I'm just like, okay, what are we doing here? Arnold at that point is getting closer and closer to her, the funeral for her mom and everything. And then we see the money, right? And then, we kind of understand exactly what happened. Because to me, you're not going to have, the thing with Line of Duty up to this point is I feel like we're kind of presented with police officers in impossible situations, but I don't know that would you say Lindsey Denton was in an impossible situation?
I would say she is.
Okay.
Because
okay, fair enough.
Well, to be fair, like, had she not accepted the money, her position, would have been far less precarious than had she accepted the money, which she did. And well, look what happened.
But she kind of had
because there was no way out. That was the thing. There was no way out.
But Akers had to have her accept the money. Mm-hmm. There was like for it to work, she had to accept the money because she had to have something to lose, right? Or else it wouldn't work. So that's the whole thing. But then the part about Akers in the series is really weird too, because she has all these files, right? That Akers' husband had that she sent to a PO box that we see, but she was also essentially on the tape. So that presented like these weird issues as well about what she was involved with. So she's a witness. She's in witness protection officer, but then she's working with the people that want to see him dead. Was that your understanding? Like, how would that work? These were then the people that would want to ambush and then kill Tommy Hunter, right?
I think I'll say this. Like, I think they had the right idea, but the way they phrased it or the way they executed it was a bit confusing.
It was very confusing because
so I mean you can understand where they're getting at. Like, after a while, you're like, oh, that's what they meant to say. It's just they could have phrased it differently.
Yeah, because we still get the feeling that she was taking money. So,
right.
So we assume she was taking money from organized crime who don't want Tommy Hunter to testify against them.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that, like, and then she's moved. So was she, do you think, moving him so he could then be killed?
I mean, I think that, I mean, obviously that was the whole point of the thing, was to move him, because if you have him on the move and you have officers on the take, it's going to make it a whole lot easier to eliminate, the element that would be a threat to your existence.
Exactly.
Right?
But then she thought she wouldn't die then.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and it's most sense to me.
But the thing is, though, is that at least from what I've seen in movies and TV shows, usually when you clean up all your loose ends, you clean up all your loose ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so we follow that logic. Lindsey Denton technically should have been eliminated along with everybody else.
Right.
Even if she couldn't see who the assailants were, even if she didn't know like 100% of the details. But logically, you would want to eliminate her just in case.
You eliminate everybody, right?
Exactly.
Like, does she have any potential information? Potentially, we don't know what she said to Akers when Akers was in her house, right? All they know is what Akers told Cotton once she got back in the car. So the idea that Denton is supposed to be protected only makes sense if she is supposed to take the fall. That's the only way it makes sense.
But that's my thing. It's like,
yeah,
even if she is supposed to take the fall, how do we know like she's going to cooperate 100%? Right?
Totally. I mean,
because I mean, like after a while, if you talk to an officer, they're gonna be like, listen, like if you know anything, I can sweeten the deal. We can probably get you out in less time. I mean, maybe we can move you to a nicer facility. Maybe we can do this or that. You do something like that, people are gonna start talking there, and that may end up putting a wrench in your work, which is why I'm saying, logically, you would want to make sure that Lindsey Denton doesn't survive just like everybody else does.
Right. It just makes no sense to leave a survivor, right? Like, it just doesn't make sense to leave a survivor. It's
kind of like how with the ancient Roman emperors, where they would go and eliminate their rivals' families, because if they left any survivors, regardless of how old they are, they could probably grow up and remember what happened and then go after them.
Oh, totally. I mean, that happens in politics as well when it comes to geopolitical stuff. But that's
so what happened there is a bit of a head scratcher, because that's what I'm saying. Like, by the end of the series, I was just far more perplexed than I was satisfied, because had they like, for example, and I mentioned this before, had they just not added anything to the Carly Kirk thing, I would have been content to say, all right, makes sense. Dryden did it because he didn't want people knowing he was diddling a kid. Makes sense. Had they kept Tommy Hunter alive, right, it would have made far more sense, because now what happens to Denton, at least for me, would make a little bit more sense as to what's going on, because maybe. Or even the fact that she's spared because she did something to kind of protect him and save his life from these assailants. It would kind of make things a whole lot more interesting, rather than him being killed and Lindsey Denton just getting beaten whichever way, because apparently everybody in the UK hates her.
Completely hates her. Yeah, and so now kind of we're left with, she's alive now, and so now you're like, why is she alive?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so weird, because when you
what role is she going to play in the future?
Yeah, because you saw her in the ambush, and you're like, okay, she's there. It's not that far away from the scene. She had kind of crashed, right? Because she
wasn't even concussed. That's the thing too, because
so she has the neck brace, but she was not at a high rate of speed into the pole. So, like, she was able to now transfer the tracking device, right? We know she did. And then she burned the implement used to do that. So it's like she was able to do all that. And then the people that committed the crime were like, oh, whatever, she's alive. Who cares? Okay.
That's not gonna come back and bite them in the ass.
Like that's okay. That's weird. You know, so, and we know that she can't identify them. She doesn't know anything. We know that. They know that, I assume.
Right.
Akers, right. So she doesn't know what's involved in this because Akers pitches this as, I'm protecting somebody that's a horrible person that assaults young girls. That's all Denton was concerned about. So that's kind of how Akers pitches it. But so, I mean, I guess we can look at it in that manner, right? Like the whole broader conspiracy with organized crime, Denton was not really concerned with. She was worried about the girl.
Right. She's not looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, she was not looking at the bigger picture. If there was one, which she really didn't know. So, you know, you could look at it that way.
Right. Well, I mean, I mean, series 2 did leave a lot of questions, but you know, it'll be up to us to, you know, find out what those answers are when we watch series 3.
Yeah, because we don't have the answers. By the end of series 2, we're like, okay, so she's convicted. That's weird. I guess that's okay, but it's not really okay. But there are these outstanding issues, right? Because, you know, Carly Clark's still alive, and it's interesting that they do. I don't know how you felt about the kind of the end kind of credits. Usually they do this in series where it's true to life, meaning these were true cases. But what's interesting about Line of Duty is they do this even though this is not a real case.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they provide these end notes, essentially. Carly Clark has not been found. She's essentially on the run. Right? So, you know, Dryden is resigned from the force. He was he got a suspended sentence, which, okay, I mean, I don't know, but you know, it's interesting that they do that because we're still kind of unsatisfied. We're satisfied but unsatisfied. Probably as an audience, we kind of feel like her punishment was a bit harsh. Probably, right?
But I mean, if you're being offered up as like the sacrificial lamb in order to make sure, you know, nothing goes awry, then obviously you're gonna, you know, do that because you don't want anybody knowing that there's something, you know, lurking in the shadows. You know?
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah, and it's like, oh, this ends it.
Well, let me ask you this, because as I was watching the series, as I watched series 1 and series 2, the question that kept coming up over and over again for me is Line of Duty written more as a British show or as an American show? And I don't want you to answer it right away. I want you to let this ruminate and rattle in the back of your head as we're watching the series, because as I'm watching, you know, series 1 and series 2, there were a lot of elements about this that just made me think this looks oddly familiar with what I would have seen on TV, you know, on NBC or CBS.
Interesting.
So again, this is something that I just want you to start thinking about. Okay. Don't
as we go through the series.
Right. Okay. So by the time we get to episode 6,
yeah,
I want you to have your answer ready. It could be a one-word answer, or it could be or it could be up, you know, 5 or 30 minutes, like whatever.
No, that's fair. I'll think about it.
Because what makes Line of Duty so unique, it's that it doesn't, at least for me, it doesn't seem to follow a recognizable playbook that we've come to expect from, you know, other British series. Even a series like Luther, for instance, it still follows, you know, the playbook that we've seen for 50 something years in British television.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to start thinking about that. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch this episode. Let us know down in the comments below. Have you watched Line of Duty, and does this discussion prompt you to want to go start watching it? Let us know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for tuning in. We will catch you on the next episode.